Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I am Nishanti Nehru, and in today's webinar, we'll be exploring a key decision every entrepreneur faces: incorporation. We'll discuss the reasons to incorporate, the legal and financial benefits, and guide you through the process of step-by-step incorporation. Only the basics right now. But if you want further information, you can always contact Nehru Law Professional Corporation and we'll go through it further with you depending on your circumstances. Now, today's webinar, a little bit of introduction about me again. My name is Nishanti Nehru. I am a lawyer in Mississauga, Ontario, and I practice mainly business law, criminal law, and civil litigation. I do have various extensive legal experience working in family law, civil litigation, and criminal court. All of these have stemmed from my years of experience, 8 years in court service division, and as well as many years working in the legal field in various capacities. I have interacted with several area individuals, including justices, lawyers, legal staff, the public, and assisted in customer service experience issues, as well as legal services experience issues, and have assisted with procedural and statutory obligations in my practice as well. So that's a little bit about me. Now we're going to go to today's webinar. And this is a webinar that might be interesting to many people because we're going to talk about what is incorporation and why incorporate. Creating a distinct legal entity is important, especially if you have a business and you don't want to incur liabilities personally. Especially when you have property and other resources, you don't want to be sued and have individuals taking away your personal livelihood because of your corporation's issues or because of an issue that occurred by an individual who's made a decision within the corporation without your knowledge, or even maybe with your knowledge, but it didn't turn out to the best of your ability. So incorporation creates a separate legal entity for businesses. This corporation can enter into contracts, own its own property, and even be sued without directly involving your personal assets. However, we will discuss further how certain aspects of a relationship with the corporation can affect the directors or shareholders. And we will discuss that in the long term when we do further webinars. Let's look at the benefits of incorporation. Here, this is important because we have a lot of benefits in incorporating. As a separate legal entity, the entity can enter into contracts. So it creates a personal protection against liability for the individuals who are entering into that contract, as long as you stipulate that the corporation will not be liable. So remember in your contracts that the corporation's decisions can be impacted by your decisions if you do not have a clear contract with a corporation or any individuals that you are actually making a contract with, and providing certain specific safeguards within those contracts. So that's important. Also, remember that lowering taxes can help. It's a potential, although it depends on your gross and revenue at the time of the year. If it's over six figures, you won't get that tax benefit that easily, but always consult a tax accountant because an accountant might be able to assist you in making sure that you're not incurring more taxes and you're not owing more taxes on your gross revenue. The professional image and credibility. These are important because remember, you're creating an image for the corporation. So it's like I have an image, but my corporation is brand new. And once it gets a credibility and a professional image, you can actually make that image stand out. Like McDonald's or even Loblaws, all of these corporations have their own images. So think about these images. They didn't create it out of nowhere. They have created it from scratch, which has identified. Now you do not know the owners of all of these franchise corporations, but you know the image, you know the arch symbol because it exists as an image of the corporation. These are logos and there are also patents. There's patents, there's a lot of different information that can occur within these information, within creating these images. So speak to a lawyer to discuss if you are trying to create an image that is going to stand out and you want to be able to copyright the image. These are the things that you should speak to a lawyer because if you don't copyright it and someone else copies it, your image can become tainted. It can dissipate over a long period, and you may be in a lawsuit if you use that image going forward. So these are things to consider. Continuity and succession plans. So these are important. Remember, you want to have plans set in place for your corporation to succeed. This means maybe an estate plan, wills and estates. You might want to speak to a lawyer on preparing an estate to, will so that your corporation can continue even after anything happens to you. Or if you have a continuity, you don't want to have issues. So make sure you have insurance to protect your corporation in case something occurs. You don't know what the situation may be, and you might want to be able to protect your revenue or at least your products and whatever else that you're selling within that organization. So make sure to create those protections by actually looking into these resources. Now, a sole proprietor versus a corporation. What are the benefits and what are the, I guess, not so beneficial issues? Whereas a sole proprietor has personal risks and um, liability, a corporation is a separate legal entity from yourself. So it doesn't incur the personal risks. However, sole proprietor may be more beneficial for an individual who is practicing on their own, or if it's a small organization and they're not willing to increase, they want to do a mama and papa shop. At that point, a sole proprietorship may be a more beneficial concept where you don't want to increase your revenue or you don't want to have, you don't actually expect to have a bigger revenue stream. Whereas corporation, you might, if you think you want a long-term goal, as well as protect yourself within that long-term goal, then you should incorporate. Or if you want to even incorporate just to protect your personal assets, as well as any kind of liability that occurs from a lawsuit, those are beneficial in a corporation. Also, taxes can actually be beneficial, especially within the 500,000 under. You can get deductions with corporations, whereas personal it might not be viable because if you make 500,000, you're paying a hefty tax deduction there. Now let's talk about when you should incorporate. Here, it is important to consider what is the most important stage of your business. Is it to incorporate because it will allow you to have more shareholders? Is it going to incorporate so because you're growing so much that you want to have directors, you want to have individuals put in place so that you no longer have to control every aspect of it? These are things to consider. Is the revenue increased so much that, and the growth has increased so much that now you are actually going on a national and multinational level? Or you could also incorporate just because you're growing to a point where you have shares and you want to be able to make sure that those shares are properly designated to the individual shareholders, and that you are creating a dividend stream as well as taxing liability. All of these considerations have to be made. These are things you should talk to a lawyer about because your business it'll depend solely on your business and your revenue income as well as your what expectations you have in your business. Consider all the possibilities. As well as if you're hiring multiple employees, now you've gotten to 20 employees and you want to reduce your risk of being in that position where you're liable to the employees' salaries, employees' CPP retirement funds, insurance, unemployment insurance. These are all considerations you have to take into account when you're dealing with a corporation. So it would be best if you're growing your business and you want to be able to put safeguards in place, speak to a lawyer. Discuss your options, including shareholder agreements, including employment labor agreements. All of these aspects should be considered. So, incorporating federally or provincially, which way should we sway? This is not something that is complicated because you can incorporate both federally and provincially if you did want to grow, but sometimes it's better to incorporate in one level. As federally, you'll operate across Canada and you can actually operate nationwide and even around the world. So this is not an issue, but let's just say the considerations for taxes and other benefits may not be as feasible if you are a small corporation and you just want to be able to continue running your operation without having the access fees, access like tax deductions, as well as costs, depending on what you're doing. So at this point, you might want to decide to do a provincial incorporation because it might actually limit the cost, it might actually reduce a lot of the taxes and allow you the separate identity, but not be on a massive scale where it actually drains your funds. This is important. Consider the aspects, consider the liabilities first, and speak to a lawyer or an accountant as well. They can assist you in tax benefits when it comes to doing federally or provincially. So make sure to speak to a professional before you make these decisions. So choosing a corporate name is important, but also making sure you do the step-by-step guide to incorporate is also important. So first we'll talk about the step-by-step guide. What is important about the step-by-step guide? Oh, yes, sorry. My apologies. I probably jumped ahead a little bit there. Step-by-step guide. I want us to talk about this first because it'll give you an idea of things that you need to consider before you incorporate. Do not incorporate until you have all of these information in place because if you don't have this information first, you're just incorporating in a situation where you're going to have to scramble, or you might have issues come up later in the future, which you will have to consider. So, first off, you're going to have to think about the name. How does the name impact your situation? How are you going to be able to deal with the name and how is it going to identify your organization? So this is important. Make sure it actually emphasizes what you want to know, what product or whatever what you're selling in your name. This is what is important to consider. Then you want to do a nuance search, which is a search on your name to make sure that there is no duplication of your name so that you're not at any time being sued by another company for copying their name, which is where you want to do this nuance search to protect yourself first. And then you would file the articles of incorporation. This is complicated and may require some in-depth information, and we'll talk about this in the future, but I want to give you a bit of a heads up that you have to look into what an article of incorporation entails, meaning that you will have to appoint directors and officers. You will have to identify the type of shares you're issuing, and you will have to understand the restrictions, the implications on the restrictions of what type of organization you're actually running. So remember, if I'm a lawyer, so my corporation is restricted to the legal practice. It can only be able to anyone who's coming into my shareholders or purchasing my shares or actually becoming a partner in my organization can only be individuals who are practicing law, because the corporation is restricted to the practice of law. As similar, many corporations may be restrictive in other aspects, and you have to consider what type of restrictions are beneficial and what are not. Say you don't want to have your industry dispersed into multitude of different industries, you want to restrict it to technology. So all of the organizations that are practicing in your all of the individuals who are coming into your organization and purchasing shares will only expect technology and technological services or advancements of technology. That is the foundation of your organization. Then you might want to restrict it to technologies. Then that way there is a restriction on any other products that they can be sold. In case you want to brand yourself in that technological advancement corporation wise. So think about these things. And then you also have to register for your tax accounts, because CRA will require you to file your taxes at least within 12 months or 18 months, depending on when you register and the length of time you have to file your taxes. Consider these aspects and speak to an accountant to get further information about tax filings. Now let's talk about choosing a corporate name. This is important because it must be unique and legal, and you want to make sure that you do a nuanced search so that you are not copying any other organization, and you want to make sure that you avoid confusion with existing businesses, because you can be sued for that. You can be liable for obtaining a similar or identical, or like if I choose, instead of putting myself as a Nehru Law Professional Corporation, I say I'm going to copy someone else who is a well-known law firm, and I just change the words around and put my name in front of their name in front of that name. Now I'm copying an organization who can come after me and say, no, you're not permitted to operate under that name, because now you're taking our goodwill and our identity to be able to impose it on yours. That is brand new identity, and now you're actually making a false image, and you're creating a bad reputation for our image. So these are things that you need to consider. These are important factors. And at the same time, when you're creating a corporation, there are three kinds of corporations that you could create. There's a limited corporation, an incorporated corporation, and a corporation, a corp, which is basically lawyers have the corporation, provincial, professional corporation. That's where the corp comes in. Limited corporations are quite limited, so they're not public, they're not well known, and Inc. is usually publicly known. So these are usually corporations, they have a specific purpose, which we'll discuss further in the future when we discuss corporations and how they work. This is just a simple fact for you to know. So you can go speak to your lawyer and ask them what kind of corporation is best for my practice or my organization because I want to be on a public platform or I want to have securities. These are all things, or stocks. These are all things that you can consider depending on what your future goals are. Do you want to be on the stock market? Or do you just want to run your corporation within a small province or a small town and be able to have the funds and sufficiency to continue your work and enjoy your life that way? It's all good. Whatever it is, you should always speak to a lawyer regarding it because these discussions are important, especially how you prepare the articles of incorporation, which we're going to talk about now. So, the articles of incorporation, think of the articles as your business blueprint. It legally establishes your corporation structure and powers. How many directors and officers will be in the corporation? Will you have one director or do you want to have multiple directors? You can have multiple directors, but you want to be able to understand how decisions are going to be made. So you need to know whether you want a managing director on top of the other three directors if you are choosing to have three directors, and you want to know what type of corporation you would like to make it, a public or a private corporation. Would you want to have other people be able to buy in shares into your corporation, or I mean, purchase shares in your corporation? Or would you want to limit it to just family members? That way, or even if it's private, you can sell the whole company to another organization. But that's your choosing. In right now, we want to know like how you want to form your corporation. These are important, including the business purpose and structure. You need to know what kind of class of shares you're going to have because this is important if you're dealing with voting and how to actually create the management positions, including directors. At any point, you can vote in another director in 18 months after you have actually initiated the corporation. This usually the general meeting occurs for this purpose because you cannot always have the same director who's actually initiated the organization. At some point, you might want to change that, but if it's a family run organization, the director might continue as the same individual because you've not changed that. You have not created a voting rights, or you have not created the shareholders as separate individuals. It might just be one individual who's owned and operates the full extent of that business. So think about these aspects. What restrictions are you going to be imposing on the business? What responsibilities should the directors have? How should the shares be transferred? And are there any restrictions on the shares? These are important. So if you're considering the articles, think about these aspects because this will be coming into the articles of incorporation. You'll be actually filing with the business registry this article of incorporation that indicates these aspects. And this is important because it kind of creates a structure long term. Now let's talk about appointing directors. So let's talk about how we should appoint directors. We have to name the directors in our articles of incorporation, but we have to also tell our directors if there's multiple directors, we have to actually know what our responsibilities are. What type of corporation you have will depend on how many directors you have. If you have a corporation that's a public corporation, you might require 3 directors or more to be able to actually register your public corporation. So think about these aspects because the directors also need to know their responsibilities to the corporation and the shareholders. They can't just take on this responsibility without knowing the liabilities. Because as a director, you have a liability. You will incur a liability if some situation goes astray and you have been the signing authority on, let's say, getting a grant, getting a loan. At this point, if you take funds in or debts or any kind of specific projects and it falls through and it becomes short of funds, or the project actually has a really bad situation where you have someone get injured, these are things that the director can actually increase their liability for. If you're, let's say, you're a director and you didn't reasonably do all the precautions or take all the precautions necessary to protect your business, then you can incur liability. And this is where you might want to think, should the directors have insurance? Should the directors be protected in some way? How would you protect them? Should we make a contract where the liability is based on a shareholders agreeing that everything would be protected from the directors? However, if you're a one-person shareholder and if you're the only shareholder and you're the shareholder, the director, and you're the corporation's decision maker, now you can incur liability. So protect yourself. Get some insurance to make sure that you can actually prevent those kind of liabilities from occurring. Now, issuing shares and shareholder agreements. This is important. This will provide you with the landscape for your relationship with the organization. If you have multiple shareholders, including family members, let's say you're just running a family business, but now you have family business with the shareholders, you need to protect yourself. Not every family can make a decision perfectly without making sure that they're benefiting from it. So every person has to know what their benefits are, what their liabilities are, as well as what their responsibilities are. In this aspect, a shareholder, let's say a few family members, siblings have decided to create a shareholder agreement, or they haven't created a shareholder agreement. Now, who makes the decisions? Who's the director? Who has voting rights? Who has no voting rights? Are they going to be liable for the decisions made by the corporation? Is the shareholders agreement clarifies the roles of each individual. It also provides for dividend rights and dividend rights and voting rights, and defines the rights of each of these individuals. It is important to determine this because without having these specific restrictions, one person can say no, and you'll have a continuous conflict. So you also want to make sure in the shareholders agreement, you have a way to resolve these conflict issues too. So these are many considerations that a shareholders agreement will take into be able to answer if you have created the right type of shareholders agreement. So consider these aspects before you actually sign up for a incorporation with your family members, because they may be the perfect people, but when it comes to relationships, you are not guaranteed whether the corporation's shares will, let's say you want to make a decision. There's no guarantee. You don't have a set structure to rely back on. So you want to make sure you can protect yourself, and you want to make sure that you have the right to make the decisions in the business, that you are 50% shareholder, just in case. Those are important factors to remember. So make sure you look into shareholders agreement and make sure you speak to a lawyer before you actually go and create a corporation, because at the end of the day, your family, like you might have family members who are in a shareholders agreement, but you might also have individual separate people who are investing, who want the shares, and each one needs to know what their roles are, how they can vote, if they have the ability to make decisions, and what their rights are, and what type of conflict resolution you want to deal with, and how it will be dealt with. Those are important. Creating a corporate bylaws. This is important because it creates internal rules for managing the corporation, includes meeting timelines, how to vote, and what type of roles and responsibilities are provided for, the required compliance and governance that the corporation will rely on. This will allow you and your organization to be set up and in a proper structure where if you want to create a CEO, who votes in the CEO? The bylaws will allow you to identify these things. If you have a resolution, like if you have a conflict, you want to have a conflict resolution method that would allow you to do arbitration or mediation. This in the bylaws will be actually put in so that you can actually avoid any conflicts that might go to a lawsuit and go into the courts. And you want to avoid these things because they're costly. So in order to avoid them, you might want to make sure that your bylaws have already put into place all of these structures and have clearly identified the method in which you can deal with issues. Setting up corporate records. This is important because you want to make sure you're creating a minute book. A minute book contains basically all of the articles of incorporation, information, bylaws, any your company key, your HST number, your accounts receivable, your meetings every year, every 18 months. A corporation, after its first insurrection, your corporation will have meetings, and you want to make sure you're taking meeting notes and putting them into the minute book. Tracking decisions, resolutions, and changes. Those are important because you want to make sure that you have all of this information in your minute book. It'll help you create in the long run. Let's say after 10 years, you want to see what happened 5 years ago, and if you want to make any changes to the corporation, you have all the necessary information in a minute book, which will provide you guidance as well as keep your company's finances in check, because you want to put financial statements. At least once a year, you will create those financial statements and put them in the bylaws and put them in the minute book as well, so that it'll keep track of all of the issues and as well as finances throughout the company's life, as long as a company exists. So make sure you have the transparency, and in case of a legal audit, you have that information in the correct places. Corporate banking and finances. This is important because you want to keep your accounts separate. You don't want to entangle any personal accounts with the corporation's accounts, because that'll cause a lot of CRA audits, and you don't want to be in their crosshairs, because you might say, oh, that's a separate account, but then you have mingled both accounts. In this perspective, the CRA is going to take a point of view that it's your personal account if you've mingled them. And you don't want to have that, because you might have to pay more hefty taxes for that purpose. So speak to an accountant and make sure that you have financial records of all of your accounts receivables and your books. Like anytime you're doing your books, bookkeeping is important, monthly bookkeeping. I do that on a regular basis. Every month I do my reconciliations, which I'm required to do for my corporation. As much as I hate them, I get someone else to do it so that I can have that free time if I need to. As entrepreneurs, we go through a lot. So Make sure you have resources like accountants or bookkeeping individuals to be able to assist you in these matters. Ongoing corporate obligations. This is important as well because you will have annual returns and filings that you need to do with the business registry as well as with the CRA and with the shareholders. It's remember, shareholders are important. They want to see results. If you have multiple shareholders that are not family members, they will want to see your accounts. At least on an annual basis, you'll have to have financial statements prepared just to show your shareholders and directors will be the ones who are preparing these financial statements, or they'll get accountants to prepare these financial statements, and they will get them to provide those financial statements to them so that they can produce it to the shareholders and then file it in the minute book so that it's kept in the records. And in case of an audit in the future, your corporation is or it gets sued, it has all the necessary resources and necessary information so that you don't get into any legal implications of fraudulent misconduct or misrepresentation. These are important factors that you need to keep into account at every stage of your organization's growth. Is incorporation right for you? So this is something you have to consider. It is dependent on your income, on the amount of liability you're willing to incur, and your future plans and goals. So think about all of the aspects of your future. Do you want to you can decide to be a sole proprietor or a partnership rather than a incorporation because it might actually satisfy your needs better. But make sure you speak to someone in this regard, especially a professional, as to what the implications are and what the long-term goals are that you have, so that it'll allow you to have that aspect and you'd be able to continue working with organizations and be able to continue building your business and growing and becoming more successful, because once you get to the figure salary or a seven-figure salary on a yearly basis, you might want to consider, okay, what are the implications? What are the repercussions? But at a five-figure salary, you might not need that aspect. So consider all of the, even including products. If you're getting products that are worth 50,000, like let's say about a five-figure salary, and you're selling it for a six-figure salary. Now here is where you might be losing more funds than you are gaining, or you have more expenses. So you're not really at the six-figure salary. Consider all of these aspects and speak to an accountant to determine what your possible options are. But when you're incorporating, make sure you speak to a lawyer, because a lawyer will assist you to make sure you safeguard your structure through proper articles of incorporation and bylaws, because these are essential for long-term goals and the growth of your company, including hiring individuals or having CEOs, CFOs, and further individuals in your organization, because they need to know their responsibilities. They need to know what type of voting rights they have and how the shareholders also are able to vote them in, and how to create a conflict resolution situation. So these are important factors to consider. So the summary and key takeaway: incorporation offers protection, credibility, and structure. Understand the responsibilities it brings. Make sure that you know what you want before you incorporate. This is important. Be intentional. Setting your business up for success is very important, because you want to make sure you protect your organization as well as yourself from liability and lawsuits, as well as make your organization successful by creating proper structures and contracts and agreements that will allow you to have specific individuals with those responsibilities, like directors who are in their roles have to know what type of relationship they have with the corporation and the shareholders, as well as how they should be working with employees and what the employees' responsibilities are. These are all things that can be put into the bylaws, that can be structured into the shareholders agreement for shareholders to understand their voting rights. These are all important. Consider all of them first before you incorporate. But corporations are great avenues for individuals who want to succeed, who want to have a 6-figure, 7-figure salary, and want to be able to identify tax deductions. So consider all of these, and thank you so much for listening to my seminar today. And every aspect of incorporation will depend on the circumstances that you're in. So this seminar will always be a learning opportunity and never a legal advice. Please make sure that if you ever come into an account where you want to do an incorporation, you do speak to a lawyer to gain that information and advice, because that lawyer will be able to review the requirements that you need to succeed, including municipal requirements and other aspects of your organization, as including shareholders agreement, depending on the amount of shareholders you have. So speak to a lawyer at all times. Thank you so much again for attending.